Welcome to Awareness to Action, a podcast brought to you by Northwestern Community Services Prevention and Wellness. I'm your host, Casey, a social worker and prevention and wellness specialist here in Virginia. Our goal is to bring you stories of people who are engaging in their communities in meaningful ways, to hopefully inspire and encourage you to seek those connections in your own community. Hello, and welcome back to Awareness to Action. I'm excited to welcome Mandy McCarthy to the show today. Mandy is a prevention and wellness specialist with Northwestern Community Services Board who uses her story to help bring awareness to mental health challenges and substance use. She's the mother of an amazing 12-year-old boy, an active member of her community, and she's so enthusiastic about being the change that she wants to see in the world. I loved our conversation and the courage that Mandy possesses and exhibits in her pursuit of vulnerability within her work. She's a change maker and she's doing it boldly, and I really hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. As a heads up, Mandy and I discuss suicide, substance use, domestic violence, and sexual assault in this episode. It may be difficult for some listeners. As a reminder, help is always available. The Suicide and Crisis Lifeline can be reached by texting or calling 988. All right, Mandy, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm super excited about being here.
This has been a long time coming for our listeners, and so Mandy and I are excited to be recording finally. And let's just start. I think, Mandy, I would love to start with your story. So you are a peer support and prevention specialist, and we will get further into those roles later. But a big part of those roles is connecting with others and sharing about your own experiences. Will you start our conversation with sharing your story?
I was raised by a single mother. I was an only child, and my mom was doing the best that she knew to do with what she was doing, but I still had my own traumas and my own things that happened to me through those circumstances. I think it's very difficult for anyone to grow up raising a child on their own, and just the sometimes almost the kind of target that can be on that group of people. Of course, I experienced trauma, and that even developed even more into high school. And so I did start at an early age learning how to cope with substances. And so that led to, that was my go-to. That was what I knew to do when I was struggling with any kind of adversity or any kind of anxiety or anything like that. And there was a moment in time where I had an epiphany, felt like the Lord spoke to me and gave it all up. And I did go to college and get my bachelor's degree. But during that time, I got into an abusive relationship, and I had pretended like my whole life didn't happen before that. And so I knew that I was not okay inside, and had started therapy at the time. Through my college, they offered therapy with the students there, and that was good for me, but it also opened this whole can of past experience that I had not dealt with. And so it left me really vulnerable. I was in an abusive relationship, and my mom had a back surgery where the doctor had nicked her spinal cord on accident, which left her disabled, but also with a large supply of pain medications. I had migraines at the time, and so I was also being exposed to pain medications due to those migraines. And so with the culmination of all that was like the perfect storm. And so I became addicted to the pain medicine. It was the only time that I felt normal, quote unquote, where I could escape my mind. And so that led me down a really rough road of addiction. I got pregnant with the man I was in an abusive relationship with. I had my son, and we were homeless in and out of domestic violence shelters at that time too. And when I had my son, I was taking my mother's pain medication, and that was catching up to me. And so I was no longer able to do that, or else there would be legal repercussions. So I turned to alcohol. And because I didn't want to go look, and I thought I was a mother, I could no longer do that. I had to be responsible. So I went to a legal form of coping and numbing. And the alcohol is really what took me down, really deteriorated me a lot. And I was doing the best that I could, but I was not able, I was really struggling to take care of my son. He was not getting the best version of me. Like I said, we were in and out of homelessness and shelters. We were staying with a friend. And so eventually CPS did get involved in that. And my son did get taken away from me. He was removed from my care, which is what ultimately led me to going to rehab. And in rehab, I did not think that I was addicted. I thought that you didn't understand my life and you didn't know what I had been going through. And so anyone who had been through what I had been through would be doing the same thing. And I was just physically dependent upon these substances because this is how I was managing my life. And so I thought with the 30-day stint that I would, once I was not physically addicted, it would be a cakewalk. I drove directly to an ABC store as soon as I got out of rehab and ended up being blackout drunk for 2 days after that. It was New Year's Eve. I knew I would probably drink. I asked them to keep me past New Year's Eve, but due to insurance, they were not allowed to. And then I ended up wrecking my car and going to jail. And that was when I really understood what they were telling me the whole time in rehab, that it is a mental thing, that it is, you have to overcome and learn how to manage your mind. That addiction is not just a physical dependence, that there's a mental aspect to it. And so that really opened my eyes and was just the beginning of me understanding how truly mental the battle was to overcome addiction. And so I just tried my best to go forward from there. My grandfather, I called him and asked him to help me. And said I was ready, to do whatever it took to be sober. And so he took me in, and I did probably 20 hours of groups, at least 20 hours of groups and therapy um, a week to try and overcome that. And even then, it still felt impossible, which did leave me to even attempting to take my own life because I just felt so hopeless. And I was trying so hard to remain sober, and I just didn't know how I could live with my mind sober. I just didn't see how it would be possible to live with my mind sober. And I knew that if I could never stay sober, that I'd never get my son back. And I just thought that the world would be better without me in it. And my son would be better without a messed up mom. Then it would be better for him to have no mom than a mom that could never get it together. And so I did attempt to take my own life. And I am really only here by the grace of God. I don't know why I survived. I shouldn't have survived, but when I did, I knew that I was supposed to be here for a reason. And so I promised for me, the Lord, that I would do things His way. And ever since, I've been on this journey of just following the path before me. And because I have a life now that I never ever thought was possible for me, that's what has been the gasoline, the fuel behind me getting into the profession that I'm in now and doing what I do now. It has all been used for my good, even though it did not feel good in the moment. But I do think that I would not, if I had to do it all again, I'd still choose this pathway to be able to get to where I am today.
First, thank you for sharing your story. I think the last thing you said is so powerful. Can you just share a little bit? What are the pieces of or the elements of this path that lead you to say that? What have been the parts of this path where you're like, oh, there just is good in the world and there's good in me and it's worth it to keep going even though it's hard.
Yeah, so I think that my mom is an amazing woman. My mom was an amazing mom, given the circumstances to which she grew up. And I did not always think that way. And so I was very angry with her and thought that there was a time where I would never talk to my mom again, given the circumstances of our life. But it wasn't until I attempted suicide and survived that I realized, and through the journey of my life, my mom and me have lived very similar lives, right? And I did not think that I could stand living any longer. And so that specific instance has given me such an appreciation for my mother because she pushed through. So my mom made it through the life that I thought I couldn't make it through. And only because of that divine intervention am I still here. And so that appreciation for my mom, and that has helped grow our relationship and understanding I'm a single mom now, and understanding that my mom was in an abusive relationship with my father. So the similarities of living that way has allowed me to forgive her for not being the mother that I needed it in life, and has allowed our relationship to develop now. Other people I did not always get to see, maybe, and maybe I couldn't see because of the darkness or the mentality that I was in, but I did not always see the goodness of people. But through recovery, I've been able to see people who have loved me and fully accepted me the way that I am. And so it allows me to be hopeful for the future, no matter how dark it is, because I know that there are good people out there, because I'm only here partly due to good people. But then also going through difficult things doesn't make me afraid to conquer or overcome difficult things, understanding that there are going to be tragedies in life, right? That will suck, will be hard, but I can overcome them and I can get through them because I've already been through what felt like the depths of hell. And so I would not have that if I grew up in a life without trauma, or a world where I was very protected by the elements. And so I just feel that there's so much strength on the other side of trauma and adversity, if you can see it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's the strength of your resilience and your perspective and your commitment to keep going. And then there's the strength too of the people who have lent a hand and reached out and been there for you. When we talk about helping and we talk about the people who have been there for you in your journey and in your recovery, there's a really key distinction between reaching out to someone or giving a listening ear or a shoulder to cry on from a place of genuine care and just like humanity. I think I'm here with you because I want to see you be okay, versus giving that help with a desire to like fix or
Mhm.
cure or transform. And I know that's a distinction that you make. So can you just speak a little bit to that difference and where you've seen that?
Yeah, so when I say like good people in my life, those people were good, but that was not all to them. So what allowed them to even have a place in my life to be able to show me their goodness was that they just let me be, right? They weren't coming in with what felt like an agenda to fix me or to save me, right? Or to scoop me out of the turmoil, out of the mud and wash me off. Even though that's what they did, but that was not their agenda. They just came in because they loved me or they saw the goodness in me. And I think a lot about when I first after I attempted suicide is when I started going to church, because I did not like religious people. I did not like them feeling like I was a project or someone that they needed to save and bring to the Lord. I did not like that. But after that, I knew that what I was doing wasn't working. And so they had been asking me to go. So I ended up going to this church. What made me stay, though, was because they did not treat me any differently than anybody else. They did not make me feel like I was different than anybody else, or I was this wounded or broken person that needed to be handled with kid gloves or anything. I smoked at the time. They allowed me to smoke and they did not say one word about it. They did not complain about me smoking. They did not tell me how I should not be doing that because it's not good for my health. They just allowed me to smoke whenever I wanted to and not say a word. I helped with Vacation Bible School. And this is a really profound moment for me. I used to draw, so they welcomed me to help. And after work, I would go spend my days painting there and painting the walls with some of the women. And it would have been an opportune time for them to try and talk to me about Jesus or even ask me about myself or my struggles. And they didn't. They just sat with me. So we just sat in silence and we painted and we did things together. And they waited for me to open up and for me to start sharing or talking about myself as I felt comfortable. And that is such a profound memory for me and such a profound moment for me because they just loved me exactly where I was. And they didn't have any agenda to try and get to know my business or get to try and solve my problems. They just treated me like they would anybody else. And as the opportunities allowed, then we would share and build connection. But I always knew that they were there for me if I ever needed them. So they showed me love, and I knew that I had somebody to go to, but they didn't force me to go there unless I was ready. And so I can think back in my recovery, and I've been lucky to have a lot of people who just fully accepted me as the hot mess that I was and didn't force me to be anything different, right? They walked with me through the process, but they didn't force the process on me. And I think that is really important when we're working with people or even friends. I think my friends that have are going through grief or have lost children or things like that. And that sticks with me. I don't want when I'm with them, I don't want to treat them any differently. I want them to know that I'm there for support, but I don't want to treat them as a broken mother who just lost someone, because if everybody's treating you that way, that can be really heavy and really dark, and you can lose your identity in being an individual and a person of who you are, and then you become the hot mess. So I was not the hot mess. I was a person going through a hot mess, but that was not my identity. But if somebody treated me like that, and everybody did, then I would soon take that on as my identity. And I carry that on in my relationships with others too, because I want to be me. And I want you to be someone who walks with me through the struggle that I'm going through at the moment, but I don't want to be the struggle that needs saving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the self-fulfilling prophecy. If there are people trying to help and they just keep getting it wrong without, and we all get it wrong when we try to help, but I think you said having an agenda belongs in a corporate office or a political campaign, but just not in our relationships with one another. And I hope that every person in their journey of being there for others at some point has that moment where they're like, oh, the way I'm approaching this is not doing anything. I'm not actually reaching this person when I'm coming at them like a project. And I think,
And sometimes it can really be about us. We feel uncomfortable with that situation or that moment. And so really comes down to, it makes me feel better talking about that or approaching it this way or feeling like I can fix you. And and so it really, we have to be looking internally and asking, why do I feel the need to do that or to say that? Is it really out of care for the person? Or is it really because I feel uncomfortable with this situation? And so I feel like this is what I'm supposed to say so that we can just move on and pretend like it's not there.
Yeah. And I think what you were sharing earlier about once you were on this path of healing, uncovering more about your life and how it's impacted you and having to address that, that does happen when we're trying to help. And so that vulnerability is required both directions. It requires a lot of vulnerability for someone to turn to me and want to support me and help me because they're going to have to look at their stuff. And it also takes a great deal of vulnerability for me to accept that help because, again, I have to look at my stuff. We're just, you can't have that relationship between two people without that vulnerability. And I know that's a huge part of your story and something that is really important to you. So I would love just for you to speak a little bit more to what role vulnerability has had in your life and where you see it now.
Yeah, so I choose to be very vulnerable in all situations, but I do think it's because of just the experience that I've went through. And I've seen that when we're able to be vulnerable with one another, that the magic that can happen, right? When I don't feel like I have to hold everything in and deal with everything myself, but I'm allowed to get that out in a safe space, then it loses its power, but only when I'm sharing it in a safe space. So it does take that too. You're talking about someone who's willing to also be vulnerable with me because I'm not going to share this information with someone who hasn't also shared first, and then me being willing to be vulnerable enough to share with them. And that has been a huge part of my journey in that I've found those people who are willing to sit in the silence and to develop that connection and develop that relationship, right? Where then vulnerability was able to be had, right? So there was an unconditional love and unconditional acceptance of each other, where then we were able to be completely vulnerable with each other without any shame. I could be completely who I am and share completely who I have been without any shame of what you think about me or what that if that would change our relationship. And so that has really allowed me to accept me, because without that person allowing me to be completely vulnerable with them and still loving and accepting me, there's a lot of darkness in my closet, right? There's a lot of baggage in my closet, and there's a lot of stuff that I didn't want to even accept about myself. And so when I can share that with you and you can accept it, then it can help me accept it too, right? And so I just really do believe that vulnerability is the key to for all of us. If we can't be vulnerable um and still be valuable as a human being, then we've really lost it. I don't know if I answered the question.
Absolutely, you did. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think more and more as I get older, I realize that like storytelling and the vulnerability of storytelling is like the most important thing we can do because it is the thing that helps us to not feel alone. Like when we share what we've been through, share what we're going through, or share what we're hopeful about, that is what brings us together. Thinking you said agenda, and now that's all I can think about. That word is so helpful to talk about what's not helpful. Like when we have the agenda, even there's the sharing stories part of vulnerability. And then there's, as you also said, the sitting in the silence.
Mhm.
And again, something that doesn't work with an agenda, that's never written into an agenda, but it's so crucial for us in our relationships to have those where we can just exist and to not be speaking and to not be sharing stories and to just be living life together. And that sitting in the silence too with ourselves, that internal, I keep getting caught on my words today, that internal vulnerability of cutting out the noise and just like existing with our thoughts and again, our hopes and our struggles. It just all matters. It all matters so much. Another setting, a little context change, another setting for sharing stories is therapy. And we have talked a lot on this show about the value of individual therapy, which is a wonderful tool. But what we haven't gotten to talk as much about, and what you, I know, have had experience with, is that group therapy setting, that support group setting. So I would just love to hear what being in that environment meant to you when you were in support groups, because I think it's a kind of undervalued tool. And so I would just love if you could share that with us.
Yeah, when you were mentioning about vulnerability, as soon as I stopped talking about it and you started talking about it, I went to this group. I attended this group that was for women who had PTSD and were using substances to cope. And it was a safe space. It was a small group. So there were maybe 4 other women in the group besides me, maybe 6 max, right? I don't even think we ever got there. But it was a safe space. I was amongst people who were just like me, like different, but still in the inner core, we were the same person struggling with the same issues. And so, because of that, it allowed a very unique dynamic where we were allowed to let all of our walls down and not wear any kind of masks and just be all out there. And we had all been through horrific things, right? So there was nothing that you could say that would shock anybody. There was nothing that you could get off your chest and admit to that would throw anybody off. And there was so much power in that group because of that, because you found women just like you who had maybe been through even worse things than you. And we were all taking the masks off, and we were all taking the risk of being vulnerable with one another. Because also, when you go through trauma, being vulnerable is the complete opposite. So trauma and vulnerability don't go together. If anything, you protect yourself and you do not trust anyone when you go through trauma. And so we were breaking down that dynamic. We were breaking down that wall of saying we can't trust anybody and we can't share anything with anyone. And so we were breaking that down, and we were finding a safe space where we could have people that we trusted and we were allowed to be completely ourselves with. And it was powerful. It was an 18-week course, and I asked to take that course twice. And it was really instrumental in my recovery process too, was allowing myself to be who I was. And that's what it all breaks down to, is me allowing to be who I am and all of the stuff that I've done and all of the stuff that has happened to me, and be fully accepted for that. And so that group, and it was led by a therapist. And so our therapist kind of navigated us. They taught us healthy coping skills. We learned mindfulness and mindfulness techniques, which are things that allowed me to regain back control of my mind, because my mind was like a Rolodex. It was continuously flipping through all of the scenes of the stuff that had happened to me. And that group helped me stop the Rolodex. And so it was instrumental in my recovery process. And I'm still in contact with some of those women on Facebook, and it's just really beautiful to see what can happen when we allow people to share in their grief and share in their trauma and share in their addiction, but also give them the tools to not stay there, right? To overcome and to come out of it, to go get on the other side together.
I think what you're sharing about creating a space where the past is seen and valued and the future is also upheld. Hey, where you've come from, there's space for that, and where you're going, we have space and hope for that as well, is so important and similar to that idea of not having an agenda, not seeing something as a project, really valuing all parts of a person's story and a person's life. And who better to do that than, in your case, women who have been through the same or similar parallel experiences. I just think that's really beautiful, and beautiful that those bonds have lasted and that you're still in contact in some ways. And yeah, thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, because those women too, they told me things. So we spoke into each other's lives. And I loved my therapist, but she didn't know what she was talking about because she had never been there in my eyes in the moment. If so, I was raped in high school. Nobody could tell me how to overcome that or how to deal with that if they had not been through the same experience. And so because you didn't know what that did or the depths, you could tell me, oh, I'm going to get out of this hole. The culmination of all of this stuff that I've been through, I was so low, right? A therapist could tell me, if you do this mindfulness or you do this, you can get out of this hole. I did not believe them because they did not know how dark that hole was. How could they know? They may have read about it in books or met with people and heard about how dark the hole was, right? But that is only a level that is not even comprehensible unless you've been there, right? And so you could not even comprehend where I was. You thought you could, but you had no idea, right? And so you think I can get out of this, but I know I can't, right? And so in that group, I was able to get advice and encouragement and direction and hope from women who were in the same hole, right? So they knew how dark and how deep the hole was, and they could see the way out, or they could see the light. And so I could trust them because they knew how deep and how dark we were. And so that is another thing that was valuable about that group and being with people who were struggling through not the same, but a similar mental game, right? A similar emotional and anxiety, all of it. If they had hope, I could have hope too. And so that's what we also got from one another. Because I said I loved my therapist. Her name was Meg. She was so instrumental, but Meg wasn't us.
Yeah. And when we talk about like tools in a toolbox, your individual therapist, as you just said, was instrumental and had tools, but they were different kinds of tools than people who have experienced these traumas and hardships. And again, going back to why we have to share our stories, like if they weren't sharing their stories with you, then you wouldn't have that support. But because they had the courage to share, you were able to receive that. And because you have now had the courage to share, others are able to receive that. And it's a beautiful, I don't know, like a pass down of knowledge and a lived experience and hope. That's just really powerful to think about.
And that's why I got into the field that I'm in, because through that experience, I was able to see the value of a peer, right? The value of someone who had that lived experience and in speaking into my life and the knowledge and encouragement and support that they had. And I didn't even know that peer support was a thing, but I always knew in my mind that was what I wanted to do. And tried calling probably 50 hospitals and avenues to find out. And then one day I went to a job fair and saw a peer support set up at the job fair. And I was like, this is exactly what I've been looking. This is exactly in my mind what I knew I was called to do, or part to be a part of. And it was through that experience of people with lived experience being vulnerable with each other and helping to pull each other out of the hole.
Yeah, I'm so glad you have started talking about your work because I would love to talk a little bit more about because you were in peer support and now you're in prevention, and the two are beautifully tied and connected. So I would just love for you to share what your day-to-day looks like.
Yeah, so right now I am a prevention and wellness specialist, and what that means is I am out in the community trying to prevent suicide, prevent substance misuse, and promote mental wellness. And so we teach, so there are classes and programs that we help teach to bring education and awareness around certain things and topics. Some of those also teach you how to navigate a mental health challenge or a mental health crisis, or how to navigate someone who's having suicidal ideation or thoughts, and the steps to do to get them the resources that they need. And so one aspect of that is teaching that to the community so that they know how to handle those types of situations. We also work with community partners to try and advance the efforts that they're doing or that we're doing together. I'm part of a trauma-informed care network, and so I'm the co-chair of Triumph Over Trauma, which is everybody, all community partners coming together to try and bring trauma awareness and trauma-informed care and those resources for trauma to those in the community. And that's what I do, and I love it. Like it, I started out as a peer support, so working with people one-on-one who were experiencing substance use or mental health challenges or conditions at the time. And I love that. But that was a one-on-one basis, working with people in the thick of it. And so when I was doing that, I knew that working with individuals is great. We need people who work with individuals, but I want to try and prevent this from even happening. I want to try and stop this before it happens. And again, the prevention job is something that I had already was picturing or formulating in my mind while working with clients, that this is great and this is needed, but we need a better solution. We need to look upstream and figure out the solution to what's happening upstream to create the problem or to create the issues, right? And solve that. So then we don't have the adults or the children downstream that we're trying to help navigate the trauma or navigate the mental health. And yeah, I just knew that I wanted to try and prevent it. I want to try and prevent somebody from maybe making some of the choices that I made, or having I want them to have another resource, another answer to what they're going through than substances. I only felt like I knew substances as a coping skill. And so that's what we do in a day-to-day in prevention, is figure out how to go upstream and provide solutions, answers, and education so that downstream looks a lot cleaner.
That's a great visual in helping to explain why prevention matters. Something you said to me when we first spoke is that this role, prevention and wellness specialist role, was an answer to your prayers, and that the opposite was true, that you were the right person for the job. And I love that. I love that confidence that comes when you know that you're in the right place doing the right thing. So I would appreciate it if you could speak to maintaining that assurance in your role. Like, I think imposter syndrome is real for a lot of us. I'm not going to put that onto you, but for a lot of us, those feelings can creep in. So what do you do to maintain that assurance that this is what I'm supposed to be doing? I am making a difference in this work.
I think it comes back to what I've been through. I was able to see the value of someone with lived experience who was equally as deep and dark in the hole with me, and the education, information, resources, light, and hope that they provided in the moment. And so through this job and my position in this job, I see all the time the value of having someone with lived experience out in the community teaching about mental health challenges, substance misuse, and trauma, and the impact that can have on the community to accept what I'm saying, because it's not coming from a book, it's not coming from a program. Those are interlaced in the information that I'm giving. It's not my own information, but I'm also being vulnerable in sharing my story along with the information and the knowledge. And I see all the time how that allows people to be open to what they're hearing and to see, hey, this is an issue, or this is something we need to be paying attention to, or this is a resource that might be able to help solve the answer to the questions that we're having. And so I'm able to see all of the time the value of having someone with lived experience working in the prevention and wellness spectrum, because it allows that opportunity for me to be vulnerable and share. And people are hungry for that vulnerability. People want to hear those things. They want to see the good ending, the happy ending, right? Because a lot of the times we only hear the negative, or that people don't recover, or things like that. And so people are hungry to see that. And also, that is what is important for us to help break the stigma, right? We're not going to be able to break the stigma around mental health, or around substance use, or around trauma, or around suicide, if there aren't people who are willing to be vulnerable and share their story. And so that's what keeps me not taking on imposter syndrome or feeling like I'm, I don't know, making it the Mandy show or anything like that. I am actively helping to break down stigma by being able to share my full self and unashamedly, right? So shamedly share that I've attempted suicide, and there's no shame in that. I do not need to be ashamed about that. I do not need to be ashamed about how low I was. I do not need to be ashamed about that I lost custody of my son, all of those things, because that breaks stigma. And especially when I'm in the position that I'm in, because in the real world, quote unquote, with my background, I might not always have been able to get a job like the job that I have. But also, it takes two. It takes my company being willing to give me the job that I have, and then how valuable that opportunity is to be able to show people we can change, we do recover, and I can fully accept how you worded it, that past life, but also fully accept and step into and walk into the future life. And yeah, I just love it. And I think the world is ready to break the stigma, because a lot of people, I think, have to struggle in silence. And it's not rare. Like these things are not rare. They're pretty common. We do suicide trainings, and almost everyone in the room has been affected by suicide. The same with substance use. Everybody knows somebody who's struggled with it or has struggled with it themselves, and mental health conditions. It's not rare. And so the world is just waiting for people to say that it's okay. And it doesn't have to define who I am. I can be all I want to be, and be as successful and as professional, even after huge trauma.
Absolutely. I'm wondering, for someone who's listening to our conversation and is feeling like, oh, I have experiences to share, or I have things to give, I just haven't found the way to do it yet, like either in a vocational setting, like the workplace, or in their personal relationships. What encouragement would you give to them to find their way to that sharing?
I would say that It can be different for everybody, depending on the level of comfortability that you have. If you're not comfortable with doing it vocally yet, start with journaling, right? Start with putting it on paper, sharing all of your deepest, darkest secrets or whatever's on your heart on paper. That's also the safest place. If you don't feel like you have someone safe to share those things with, paper's never gonna spread your thoughts, and start there. But then two, I would just encourage you to go for it. Find the right opportunity. You don't want to, and I probably overshared a lot in the beginning. Don't be wise in who you're sharing with and where you're sharing and what you're sharing in the moment, because that protects you too. And not every time is the right time to share everything. But with all that in mind, just go for it and share what you want to share, especially if you find the perfect opportunity or someone is being vulnerable with you and you have the perfect story to go along with that vulnerability. Be bold and share it, because I do not think that it's ever going to be received in a wrong way. I think that people are starving for connection. They want to feel connected to people. And so I think if you're willing to be bold enough to be vulnerable with someone else, it's going to be well received. And if it ever is not, then that's okay too. Those just might not be your people or the right place to have shared, but that doesn't mean that you should take on any shame in your sharing. We live in a world where we are told that we are to be strong all the time and have it together, and that is changing, but it's only changing because of people who are willing to be vulnerable and to share their truth and share their story without any fear of what someone else is going to think. And so I would say that you would be being a part of that solution, right? And choosing to be vulnerable no matter the cost.
It can be life-saving to share,
Yeah.
truly.
Yeah, you never know what someone is going through.
Mhm.
And substance use and suicide and mental health, it doesn't discriminate. You can't look at a person and tell that they would be affected by those things. And so you never know what's going on the inside in a person. And so you truly could be the thing that helps save their life, the one light in a dark world around them. I think of Kevin Hines and how he was just hoping that someone would stop and notice him before he attempted suicide and jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. And nobody stopped to notice him. Nobody was willing to connect. And it's important that we see each other and that we're willing to connect with each other and not just connect on a superficial level, or not just connect because of an agenda, but connect because we care about others and we want to thrive together.
Absolutely. I'll link the title of Kevin Hines' book in the episode description for anyone listening who's not familiar with him. He did survive his suicide attempt and is a huge advocate in the mental health space now. So I'll link that. And then, Mandy, to wrap up, would like to ask you our namesake question. What does the process of awareness to action mean to you?
When I think of awareness to action, I think first of storytelling, bringing things to awareness, that education piece, letting people know the what's going on, the facts about things. And that's all important and that's all good, but that does nothing unless there's actually action. And so when I think of awareness to action, I think using all of that to actually go out and do what is needed to bring forth the world we want to see or the solutions that are out there.
Fabulous answer. I think really your vocation and your work is the answer to the awareness to action question. Like, how do you take what you know and what you've lived through and make change? So thank you for the ways that you do that in your work. Thank you for coming on the show and for sharing your story with us and your reflections on why it matters to tell stories and how you've been impacted by other stories. I feel really grateful to have had this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening, and thank you again to Mandy for joining us. If you liked this episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our future conversations.